Hi, welcome back everyone to another episode of the Brain Curiosities podcast. And today we're having to talk about genetics and ADHD, Dr. Oscar Lao from the Institute of Evolutive Biology in Barcelona. So hi, Oscar.
Hi. Hi, hello.
Can you tell a bit people, what it is exactly that you do, what kind of research you do, and also, what got you into ADHD and all of that, basically.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really a great pleasure to be here today. As you said, I'm a principal investigator at the Institute of Evolutionary Biology in Barcelona here. And basically what we are doing is trying to understand from genetic variation that we have in humans, what processes led us to this rise of this genetic variation. And by processes, I mean evolutionary processes.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we are interested in two types of situations. One is where the genetic variation is not really affecting the function of the phenotype, and then we talk about a neutral variation. And by analyzing this neutral variation, we can make insights into the demographic history of our species. That would be the first thing. And the second thing is when this variation has a functional effect on us, then depending on which is this functional effect, we talk about selective pressure. So this is the other side. And in my group, we are basically mostly interested in trying to set up new methods from statistical point of view or informatics point of view, if you want to call it, in order to study those processes. So in order to be able to extract from this genetic variation things such as when the humans were born, say, did the humans interbreed with other species such as Neanderthals? Or, for example, for a phenotype such as ADHD, did this phenotype have been under selective pressures? And if that's the case, when it happened?
Okay, so for example, when you say this did phenotype be under certain pressures, so in the case of ADHD specifically, for example, what would that look like? Let's say 40,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean the point is, ADHD is one of the toughest examples that we are analyzing. Because ADHD is what we call a complex phenotype. So by complex phenotype, it means that it's environment and also tons of genetic variants are involved. I mean, in fact, we don't really yet know how many genetic variants are involved in the phenotype. So the only thing we know is that from a phenotypic point of view, it's quite prevalent in the current population. And this is kind of weird from an evolutionary point of view because this phenotype has been or tend to be associated to trade backs nowadays. So we could consider it as detrimental having this condition from an evolutionary point of view. I'm always talking from this biological point of view.
Yeah, because it might give a disadvantage in today's society, and more people are at risk for a lot of stuff that have ADHD. And so from an evolutive point of view, it might be, detrimental, as you say.
Exactly. So, and then the point is that we know that in nature, if something tends to be detrimental, then it tends to get erased from the population. So this is a paradox. I mean, if it's detrimental, how it comes that it's so prevalent in the population. So this is what I mean by studying from an evolutionary point of view this phenotype. The thing is that when we talk about complex phenotypes, since we don't really know, I mean, we start unveiling which is the genetic background of those phenotypes. But nowadays the studies that are conducted on ADHD people, for example, to try to fish those genetic variants, they are still in its infancy. So we are picking very few markers so far. So this means that when you try to do evolutionary studies, you focus on those type of markers because those are the ones that are associated with the phenotype. And then you just try to do some evolutionary analysis to see whether the alleles that are increasing the risk of having this phenotype have increased or are decreased in current populations, and how does it goes through time frame like going from the Paleolithic to nowadays. That's more or less the idea.
Okay, so a question that I have is, you mentioned that if a phenotype is not advantageous, then it gets eventually, flushed out. which is also what I studied in biology classes. So this is great. However, there are a lot of other phenotypes than ADHD. You have autism, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and so on. And you might argue that those also are detrimental, let's say, to survival today. So would that be, the same kind of hypothesis that you'd have for those one? So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, at what point do you consider that a phenotype is prevalent in the population? Because we know that ADHD today is quite prevalent. It's the latest studies show it that it's between 5, 7, 10% even in children and 5% in adults. But all other kind of disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar instead are around 1 or 2%, which is a lot less. So around what cutoff do you think that a phenotype can be disadvantages completely or kept in the population because of some or other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, there is. So first of all, that's a very tricky question.
yeah, it's I've been asked these questions a lot, and so I want to kind of have your opinion on it.
Yeah, so the point is, first of all, phenotypes are not islands. So in fact, they are a continuum, and many phenotypes, so many genes are involved in many phenotypes at the same time. Okay, so then it means the first consequence is that whenever it can be good for one phenotype, the same genetic variant can be detrimental for another phenotype. So there is a trade-off always. Evolution works not really. It's not a gain to zero situation, but there is those kind of trade-offs, and then you have to figure out. Evolution has to figure out through selection of the most fittest individuals, which is the best trade-off. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the first thing. So the fact that this phenotype it's prevalent, it's obvious. It's always a matter of compared to what. One of the key points is that if new variants are constantly being erased, but also created in the genome by mutations, because this is how it works. Then you will end up having an equilibrium between the mutations that are erased by evolution and the ones that are created just by mutation. And the selective pressure, so how strong this erasing will determine the amount of individuals that you have carrying this phenotype. Since we don't really know how many variants are involved in this phenotype, I cannot make you a strong guess of what should be the prevalence that you expect under this equilibrium or of mutation selection. But in my opinion, having a 5% of adulthood with this phenotype is quite prevalent. I mean, it's given the side bags that nowadays we see, and I stress this word nowadays. It's something that I wouldn't expect just by this mutation selection process.
Okay, because back when I was in university, we studied also the heterozygous advantage and the fact that if you have a mutation or a genotype that provides an advantage, but only in combination with some other mutations, then it provides a detrimental effect in combination with others. So I thought maybe ADHD could be something like that. If you have some traits, it's good. If you have all traits, then it's bad, and it could kind of be. I mean, that is complicated because, as you said, it's a lot of different genes and that are involved, and the interaction with the environment.
Another thing that is very interesting of this phenotype in general, as I said, because they are the same genes are involved in many situations. So one could consider, to a certain point, ADHD as the extreme of the extremes of different subphenotypes. Okay, so if you can decompose the ADHD into different dimensions, also hyperactivity, hypervigilance, and so on. So ADHD would be the extreme of those dimensions. But those dimensions per se can be extremely beneficial. I mean, and not being in the extreme of this tail could be perfectly beneficial. So selection could have a pressure for increasing those in frequency, given that only the tail of the tail is the one that is getting this say drawback performance, to say in a way. So that's another issue. I mean, phenotypes are extremely complex, and we are start just unveiling how do they work.
So it would be more or less as if, evolution somehow sacrifices a few individuals, but to keep the traits in the general population because they are,
Yes.
in the end, advantages.
Yeah, so individuals that carry an intermediate level, I mean, it's a very wild way to say, but an intermediate level of ADHD that could be advantageous for the individual. And since if the largest part of the population is intermediate for ADHD, that would be fine. I mean, the ones that are in the tail that are not ADHD at all or completely ADHD, I mean, using this wild definition,
Yeah.
those would be the ones that would be have less chances of producing offspring. But
Okay.
for evolution would be fine. I mean, as far as the yeah, I mean, this is how it, as bad as it sounds, how it works for evolution. Yeah,
No, I get it. I mean, this is, speaking on purely evolutive terms. It's like any other trait or phenotype at the end of the day, right?
totally.
So this leads me, to the study that you published about ADHD and how it evolved over human history. So, could you tell me and tell, people listening further after we record this, the main findings of the study? How would you summarize that, but still in a way that is, accurate?
That's another tricky question.
It's very
Yeah.
tricky.
Well, the basic idea is that, as we said, the phenotype is a very complex one, and then there has been different hypotheses about why this phenotype is so prevalent. Those are evolutionary hypotheses, and the point is that, I mean, making evolutionary hypothesis is kind of free. You can, whatever trait you see, you can try to make a history out of it that involves evolution and selective pressures. Testing that, it's much more complex.
Yeah.
Basically, because I mean, in order to test this hypothesis, ultimately you should be able to go to the source where evolution is working. That those are the genes and the genetic variation, and try to see if there is the fingerprint. Can you reject the hypothesis that what you see is just by chance?
Yeah.
So when we are talking about selective pressures, we say that there is something that is directly going towards one end, that is basically or either the fixation of the phenotype or the erase of the phenotype.
Yeah.
That's how it works. So in this sense, what we did in the ADHD study, and by the way, this study was co-directed by with Brooke Ormand. It's a professor in the University of Barcelona, and he was the one that came to me with this hypothesis about why ADHD could be under selective pressures. So that was what we wanted to test. So what we did is we went to one of the latest study, well, the biggest study that had been done at the time on ADHD, trying to record or find the genetic markers, genetic variants that are associated to this trait. And with those genetic markers, what we did was to follow up a study on evolutionary terms. So one of the things we did is we go to look ancient DNA genomes that they are covering from 50,000 almost to the present. And then we saw what was the prevalence of those risk alleles over time. So the idea was, if those alleles have been not under any kind of selective pressure, I don't expect those alleles to be showing any type of temporal pattern. So I would expect a straight flat line when I look for the time with the frequency of those markers. And what we saw is that that was not the case. So those markers tend to be in a higher frequency in the past compared to the present, which was one of the first shocking things because we didn't expect that to see. It makes sense from one of the hypotheses that has been proposed in this for this phenotype, that this trait could have been advantageous in the past. So being ADHD in the Paleolithic times, or like 50,000 years ago, would have been good for the survival of the individual in the environment. And what we observe is that this trait, those alleles, are decreasing over time towards presence. So nowadays, and this is would be the second part, those alleles are being erased from the population because nowadays this phenotype it's detrimental. So it's in the past was not detrimental, and nowadays it's detrimental. So this would be one of the first main conclusions. The other thing we did is we look for the presence of archaic introgression. So we know nowadays that when the anatomical amount of humans appear in Africa, and then they go out of Africa, and then they kind of conquer the world.
Yeah, this is the migration in human history. They went
Exactly.
away. There was a small portion of the population in like a
they make a big diaspora, and the point is that when they went out of Africa, they found that there were other people already living, particularly in Eurasia, and we call them Neanderthals and Denisovans. So they are the different kind of subspecies, if you want to call them, and they are coming out more and more evidences of other subpopulations of archaic hominins. The point is that when they went out, the first thing they did, well, the first thing, no, but we have evidences that they made with them. So we are people out of Africa, and even within Africa with other subspecies, we carry in our genomes fragments of this hybridization. Okay. One of the things that we wanted to test out was whether the alleles that are associated to ADHD, if they were of Neanderthal origin or not. And what we saw was basically that the alleles that tend to be increasing the risk for ADHD, first of all, tend to be the ancestral ones. So they tend to say the ancestral status of our ancestors was to have higher ADHD alleles that are nowadays called associated to ADHD. And the second thing, what we saw was that with the Neanderthals, there was an evidence that the Neanderthals also carried a higher proportion of those ADHD alleles. Of course, one of the first thing one can say is, okay, so does this mean that Neanderthals were ADHD? And the answer is not really, because we don't know which other alleles that are specific from the Neanderthal background are associated or are protective for ADHD. But what we know is that the ones that are nowadays associated to ADHD tend to be enriched in the Neanderthals, and also tend to be the ones that in our ancestor were the ancestral state.
So if technically the alleles or the genotype predicting for ADHD was found in two distinct populations around the same time, that the hypothesis is that it actually gave a specific evolutive advantage, because otherwise those two populations that evolved in different parts and in different ways and at different times, if it was not an advantage, then it wouldn't have evolved to be carried in both of those subspecies. So that is the idea, and that is where the hypothesis that it was an advantage came from, actually. Now I get it better.
Yeah.
No, so it's it's interesting to understand exactly where that idea comes from, because a lot of people say, yeah, it was an advantage back then, but what is actually the data that shows
evidence,
this? And this is actually quite strong evidence, because if you think about it, two distinct population carrying exactly the same traits, then it probably means that this trait is an advantage at some point.
Yeah. And another thing that shocked us was that the ancestral allele was the one that was associated to being ADHD, because for many other phenotypes, what you see, and particularly for phenotypes related to psychiatric disorders, what we see is the reverse pattern. So we see that the ancestral allele tends to be the protective, and the derived allele that tends to be at a low frequency in the population tends to be the one that it's increasing the risk.
And that what usually comes from Neanderthals and the Denisovans.
Well, there are for some particular phenotypes and diseases, what we observe is that it's the Neanderthal and the Denisovan allele, that it's in the introgress one, that gives you more risk to, for example, smoking or to having depression. So this type of things.
Okay, so Neanderthal gives you more risks of depression. Great.
Well, I mean, but you have to take this into into the broad context. I mean, it's not that we don't know if the Neanderthals were depressed by default, but this is how it. Because it's bringing it to quite simplistic say framework, it can end up saying that, look, because we have seen that those alleles are associated to, this
Yeah.
means that they are like this, and this is not the case. I mean, association implies that it's only increasing the risk of having the phenotype, but that has
And
not.
it increases the risk of having it today in combination with our genes and with the ancestral ones. Maybe that
Exactly.
gene that gives an increased risk of depression today in combination with the ancestral didn't in Neanderthals, because maybe they had other neuroprotective factors that
Exactly.
compensated for that.
Totally.
So no, it's just, this is extremely interesting. So I didn't know that usually the ancestral genes were protective of disorders. This is
They
something that
tend to be. I mean,
they
it's
tend
not
to
that
be.
always, but they tend to be. I mean, it's, as I said, it's really phenotype dependent, but there is kind of this trend that the. I mean, it also makes sense because if you think that the ancestral allele is the one that is more prevalent in the population, if the ancestral allele is the one that it's increasing the probability of having the phenotype, then it would mean that a huge proportion of the population would have this phenotype.
Yeah.
I mean, it only works with phenotypes such as ADHD when you have a quite substantial proportion of individuals that carry the phenotype. Then
Yeah,
you say,
and
okay,
worldwide. I mean, it's
exactly.
they haven't found any differences in ADHD prevalence in any part of the world. So that
Yeah.
supports actually the
Yes.
hypothesis.
Exactly.
This
Yes.
is amazing. So I have a couple of questions out of everything that you just said. The first one is that what, for example, can be advantageous traits that ADHD would have back then, and why would those traits be detrimental today?
Well, the first one, it would be a hyperactivity. I mean, I can imagine. I mean, but this is, again, this is kind of a cartoonish type of hypothesis. So, I mean, you have to be very careful with the.
Of course.
But I mean, and particularly because when, as I said before, when you talk about evolution, there is always an evolutionary explanation for for your results. So, then the thing is that in the case of ADHD, being hyperactive in the past, when we were hunter gatherers, could have been extremely beneficial. I mean, I can imagine being in the middle of the forest, hunting something or being hunted by something. I mean, it's really it's really an issue to be extremely active or impulsive even. I mean, first you kick and then you see what have you kicked. I mean, I mean, in the past that could be very very beneficial, or nowadays it's not, it's the other way around. So we want to be reflexive, to be sedentary, to be extremely focused in doing one task. I mean, in the past I can imagine that it was much more dynamic, and there were a lot of things going on at the same time.
Yeah, so it might have been a good idea to first react and think afterwards, because you're in a kind of fight or flight situation all the time.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, imagine you're in the middle of the forest and then you start you hear a noise. I mean, I would right now I would start running. I mean, but and then I would be hunted by that thing. So I can
Yeah.
imagine that someone that was just striking back, that would have had more chances of surviving.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Doing.
Yeah, so for the next question that I had about this, about the, well, you said the hyperactivity, and I guess also the distraction and the inattention to some extent, because I think that if you're focused on a lot of things at once and you have, not say poor working memory, because people with ADHD don't necessarily have less working memory, it's just that they have more useless information inside of them. But if you're in a context of survival all the time and you're in the forest and you pay attention to a lot different more stimuli, then that would be that would also mean more chances of either catching prey or detecting a predator if if you're
Yes.
outside, because the threshold of the signal to noise is lower.
Totally. Yeah. I
So
mean, the point is that, but as I said before, I mean, we have to be very careful with this because otherwise we end up in a cartoonish type of
yeah, of course.
storytelling. And as I said, I mean, the phenotype itself, it's a very complex and it involves many dimensions. So the first thing is that we don't know which are the phenotypes or the traits within the phenotype that are under selection, and we don't know to which other phenotypes are linked that could also be under positive selection. So it's always tempting and very nice to make an explanation of the results from an evolutionary point of view. but this can just by fire back because, as I said, I mean,
Yeah.
we know very little about the phenotype itself.
And so another small question. This is really out of curiosity. How did you find the the genetic material, the ancient genomes? How were those found and extracted and analyzed? Because this is, I think,
Yes.
it's a very interesting. I mean, you don't have Neanderthals running around, so
No,
so how do you extract those kind of genetic markers?
no, not anymore. With yeah, I mean, the Neanderthals were extinct, went extinct like 25,000 years ago, something like that. So there is a huge community of people that is studying ancient DNA, and there is a huge database, and this is the one that we use. That it's from David Reich, that they have been collecting the I would say the genetic databases from different papers, and they have just wrapped into a single huge database.
Oh, that's amazing.
So this is the kind of the technical point. The biological point is, I mean, you go to a place where you have bones, and from those bones, usually, I mean, they are quite the DNA tends, once we die, they start getting degraded. But there are some parts of our body. So, for example, within the teeth, that they tend to get preserved. And then one of the things that they do is they pick the jaw, they pick the teeth, and then from there they extract they extract DNA. The DNA is still it's quite degraded, and depending on the sample, the amount of DNA that you can recover is quite limited. So this means that when they do, there is a huge technology going from this degraded DNA to do a capture of this DNA, and then just to make an inference of the genetic variations that have this DNA.
Yeah, so there's
So
a huge reconstruction process.
yes, yeah. I mean, it's, and usually you don't have. I mean, when they say they have recovered the genome of whatever, it's usually it's not true. What we have, it's, I mean, but it's how it works. I mean, except in the case of very few Neanderthal specimens, where we have full genomes, and the Denisovan, that we have also full genomes. Also very few ancient anatomical humans, where we have also the complete genomes. Usually what we have is what they call a SNP capture. So they look for particular regions that we know that nowadays they are polymorphic, so they have genetic variants, and then they try to see if they can, in those particular regions, they can also find first DNA in the sample, in the ancient DNA sample, and then see which is the genetic variant that that particular position they have.
Okay,
so they end up with 1 million markers, something like that.
So on the technical point of view, you would still be able to quite accurately see if there are genetic markers of ADHD or whatever other things that you're looking for. Okay, this is actually really cool. So I'm moving on, to the next phase of the questions. There are some other studies that have come out also about genetics, but this time that are not only about genetics, pure, but also about gene per environment interactions. So in this case, there was a study done in Kenya about a mutation on the D4R4 gene exon 3, and that codes for a dopamine receptor, which is also a mutation that is commonly found in ADHD, because ADHD has dopamine reuptake issues and so on. And they have found that in two different environments, so in a nomadic environment or in a sedentary environment, then that specific mutation or a mutation of that gene then yielded very, very different effects. Because especially in terms of nutrition, so they analyzed the nutrition of these individuals, and they found that a mutation in the D4R4 gene that is also, again, usually correlated with ADHD, in the nomadic tribe, in the nomadic lifestyle, it led to a better BMI and to better results, while in the sedentary one, it usually led to a worse results and worse health overall. So how do you think that plays, into what you said and into your study? Is it possible that the pressures that have gone over ADHD over the past 40, 50,000 years have also changed because of an increasingly sedentary lifestyle of humans, and therefore the interaction has somehow changed or been reversed?
Totally. So this was one of the conclusions that we suggested. So we have to take into account that from evolutionary point of view, we are just a byproduct. So of the interaction of our genes with the environment. I mean, it's sad to say like this or depressing, but this is how it works.
Yeah.
So if the environment changes, what happens is that in evolutionary medicine, they call it happens a mismatch. So if we were adapted to a particular environment, and this environment, we were genetically adapted to one environment, and this environment just suddenly changes. And by suddenly, I mean, it's what happened with humans in the last 10,000 years. I mean, it's a very strong change from all the levels. I mean, from where we live, from how we live, or from what we eat, what we have to behave. This is a very short amount of time from an evolutionary point of view, and then it means that whatever before was good for a particular environment nowadays can be detrimental, so can be bad. And this study that you are reporting is basically showing that. I mean, if you have been adapted as a hunter-gatherer to live in a particular environment, and suddenly we change the environment because we think that this is better for ourselves, then what it comes is that there is a trade-off, as I said before. There is a sideback, and this sideback is that some of the genetic variants that before were good now can be not detrimental.
Yeah. And and in also how the genotype can be managed, because I'm thinking about the studies that show that exercise is very beneficial for ADHD, for example. So maybe there's a threshold after which you exercise, and then suddenly you have a better managed ADHD, and suddenly you manage to live better. But below that threshold, then it becomes detrimental, and that could be also
Totally.
as you said, it's interaction, it's complex. It's a whole mess.
Yeah, it's totally. But this is what you say. It's totally. So there. I mean, there are a subset of phenotypes or traits that are associated also to being hunter-gatherer, and keep bringing those. I mean, again, it's kind of cartoonish, but bringing those traits into your lifestyle, this could be good. I mean, it will be good in general because nowadays we know that sedentarism is not a very healthy condition.
Yeah, for anyone.
But in particular for some particular phenotypes, it could be a huge help. I mean, I'm not saying that nowadays we should go naked and just hunting rabbits in the middle of the forest. I mean, this is not the point. Just to put it again in a cartoonish way, but some of the traits that nowadays we are facing. So right now, sitting as we are doing, this is not natural for us. I mean, if you go to the hunter-gatherer population in Africa and you ask them to do what we are doing, they will say, "What, are you crazy?" I mean, no, we have to be moving. We have to hunt for food. We have to gather for food. So.
Yeah. You have to stay up. You have to go and meet people outside and interact with the world and the environment and
Exactly.
And all of that. Yeah, sitting in an office for 8 hours is not natural for anyone, but I guess that for people that carry the more hunter-gatherer traits, it's even worse.
Totally. Yeah, that's. I mean, it's. I don't want to put labels like you are more hunter-gatherer or no, you are more. But it's this would be the situation ultimately, if you want.
Yeah. I absolutely see this. Well, there was another study that came out actually very recently, 2024 one, I think, about ADHD and foraging. So it was an interesting one because the methods were about putting people in front of a computer and making them go through a video game of foraging, and they have noticed that people that displayed ADHD traits tended to not deplete bushes and instead move on from bush to bush, and at the end of the whole day they gathered a lot more berries and a lot more fruits than the non-ADHD traits did, because they stayed at the bush and at the tree, and they wanted to pick every single last one bit of fruit. So I thought that that result was interesting because it does show that there could be an advantage in gathering for people that have ADHD traits. But of course, there are also a lot of issues with the study. It was done sitting down on a video game. It was only one time because maybe if you have ADHD and you get bored fast and you have to do it every day for 2 months, you're
Yeah,
not going to pick any berries after that because maybe you're going to get distracted by a rabbit.
yeah.
And other stuff like people have said that it's the actual optimal way to pick a bush to leave some berries on it because then it can reproduce and it yields more things, so it's better ecologically and so on. This being said, what did you think about that study and how do you think that relates to the one that you wrote and you made?
Yeah, I mean, again, just it goes in the line that for what we were saying. So if one of the conclusions that we draw, or that, but this was kind of things that we talk with Brew, is that if it's what we were saying was true, so if the change of the environment from Paleolithic hunter-gatherers to Neolithic sedentarism is one of the factors that it's making this phenotype really detrimental, then reverting the phenotype would be basically going back to hunter-gatherers style.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, not really physically, as I said before, not going back naked to hunt rabbits or to grasp berries, but to emulate somehow the stimuli that you could have during this period of time. This study, what you are saying, it goes totally in agreement with what we said. So yeah, I think it's really nice.
So, in terms of what you said, going back to more or less a nomadic thing, which is not again going naked in the forest. So that would mean having more exploratory behaviors, having more physical activity, having more less repetitive tasks, less
Yes,
repetitive routines, because the nomadic lifestyle is all about constant change and adaptation to
yes,
constant change.
totally.
So
Not
the
being
idea is,
sitting in the same place for long times of periods, not having to be focused on the same task for a long time of periods. Yeah, that could be one way to explore.
so
Yeah.
being less routinely and more exploratory, impulsive, and in the moment, more or less.
Yes.
Okay, this might come off as a very difficult question, but what can you think today that could be done in these ways? What kind of job or what kind of life could people do to be adapted more to this kind of life? Because as you said it right now, more exploration, less boring and repetitive tasks. That sounds like the dream for me.
Yeah, totally. Well, one of the things that could be done, I mean, but this is totally not as scientifically. Yeah, this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
this is just so one of the things that I could be done, and I think that there are companies that have started going in that way, is to work with a virtual reality and then offer in this type of environment in a virtual reality context. Then one thing people suffering from ADHD could have, it's okay. So you know that the amount of time you can be focused in a particular task is very limited. Then you stay this amount of time doing this task, and then you spend a break where you go into this virtual reality world where you do more kind of impulsive or natural behaviors, to say. That could be one thing. Other things, of course, would be to have to be allowed the people to have breaks and then start doing exercise even in the office, for example. That could be another. And I know that there are some companies that they offer this type of services. So there is a gym even inside of the same company. They have to be very quite big companies, but still. Those are things that I think even people that they don't have ADHD
Mm,
would really appreciate it. I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely. And so even maybe having a more physical job or stuff that requires you to travel often or these kind of things, because there is
exactly,
these sudden and continuous change in the environment that keeps you interested and keeps you stimulated, more or less.
exactly.
Yeah, so
Yes.
I'm thinking real estate agent, flight attendant, and this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's just on the top of my mind. I hadn't planned this, but no, this is extremely interesting. And then, well, I think you answered this already, but I would still love to have your take on it. There is, going around, especially on social media and also on regular media, this idea that there is, the ADHD is the hunter-gatherer phenotype more. So I'm guessing that your response is going to be very nuanced, but basically, what do you think about the hunter-gatherer hypothesis?
I mean, it's a very nice hypothesis, and the results that we got, they go in that direction. Okay, but as I said, we don't know exactly the hunter-gatherers because we don't have a population of ancient hunter-gatherers that are still alive, and we cannot go traveling on time to do exactly the same type of studies that we are doing nowadays with current population. So the way how we analyze ADHD, for example, the genetics of ADHD, is you have a set of individuals with this phenotype and a set of individuals that have not this phenotype. Then
Yeah.
you go to the genome of all those individuals, and then you look for say, I don't know, 1 million markers over all the genome. And then you genotype those markers in all the individuals that you have, ADHD and non-ADHD. And then you basically compare, for each marker, you compare the frequencies of the ADHD with non-ADHD. If the ADHD have higher frequency of allele A compared to the non-ADHD, you say that allele A is the risk allele for
Yeah.
having ADHD. So this is the idea. Of course, I mean, if we want really to understand the phenotype in ancient times, we should go backward in time with a time machine and go to the hunter-gatherers of that time, and then classify them in ADHD and non-ADHD and do the
Yeah.
same analysis. I mean, this would be the way to see which are the variants that we have lost over time because they were ADHD or non-ADHD associated, and
Yeah.
now they have been fixed in current population.
Yeah, but I mean, on the top of my head, there are some populations that are still nomadic, even though it's very rare. But you still have, in Mongolia, in Kenya,
Yeah.
even in Norway, you have the Sami people. In Canada, you still have some populations that are nomadic. Would it be possible, hypothetically, to go study them, see if they have genetic markers for ADHD, and then see how that lifestyle impacts that genotype?
Totally. I mean, the ideal, setup, again, from an evolutionary point of view, I'm not meaning that we should do this, would be to have a population, a hunter-gatherer population, then you split it in two, and then half of it, you get it into an environment that it's agriculturalist, so Neolithic type of environment, and you let the other half and in this nomadic way, and then after some generations, you see how the frequencies of the different genetic markers have changed in agreement with being ADHD or non-ADHD, or if the frequency of ADHD people increases or decreases in one of the two
Yeah, that
environments.
would be if you have a lot of time and resources, because after a few generations, well, we will long be gone.
Yes, well, well, the thing is that you don't really need to do this type of setting, which is, of course, it's not ethical. I'm not advising to do it. There are some populations where particularly in Africa, that they still kind of keep the hunter-gatherer style. They are not completely hunter-gatherers, but they still keep this type of behavior, of lifestyle, and you have the other part of the population that have already adopted the agriculturalist type of behavior, and
Yeah.
then there you can do this type of study. So you can go there, and then you
Yeah,
can
because you
do
already have that separation
yes,
and the
exactly,
knowledge that they share the same genetic origins.
yes,
I think this is where the D4R4 study, the one I talked about earlier
exactly,
in
yeah,
Kenya, was done, because they had the same
yeah,
population but in two different settings.
exactly.
Um, so it would be amazing to have further studies on that, because there was no follow-up on that study, which is very sad to me, because I thought it was extremely interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have a couple of final questions. The first one is, what would you like people to take away from this whole conversation, from your study, from this hypothesis, and from all the information that is out there? What is what is the main idea that people should take away after listening to this and after listening to you?
Yes, if I have to make a summary of the whole ideas, would be evolution rules. So uh, just including evolution in the studies, it's I mean, it's not because I live from it, but it's very interesting. I mean, in the case of ADHD, it offers a dimension that it's not a medical one, it's a biological one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very interesting. I mean, when we started showing the results to parents and to people with ADHD, they felt that it was a really nice result. First for the parents, because sometimes, I mean, they confess to me that sometimes they felt guilty. I mean, in this in current society, having at least in Spain, having a child with the ADHD, it can be seen as a default of the parents, because they
Oh,
are
in
not.
all societies, there's a lot of people around saying that, you know, ADHD is just bad parenting or bad nutrition or this or
Exactly. So
that.
this type of thing. So having this biological, I mean, for them there was kind of a release. Also, so you are telling to me that it's a biological issue. So
Yeah.
it's something that happens. This is what you're. Yes. I mean, for me it was shocking too, because I always thought in that way, but obviously, I mean, I understand that this is this can be an issue. So I think that including evolution in the medical aspects or biological aspects of current life, it's a very interesting, because it offers something that is completely new.
Yeah, absolutely. And it offers a completely different perspective than the usual one that we are fed, which is, you know, it's a disorder, it has symptoms, you have to the medication and the thing and the therapy and so on. And seeing it from a biological perspective, it also gives more or less insights into how you could use it actually in your, you know, in your everyday life. Because a lot of
Exactly.
people, after seeing these hypotheses, and I know this because I'm seeing it on social media with people talking to me and all of that, people after seeing this hypothesis and this paper, they said, you know what, I'm just going to go live in the countryside and go do stuff that, you know, but really, you know, that is less
Yeah.
sedentary, and just go around and move more, and they've had a better life because of it, right?
Yeah,
So
of course.
this could also give insights into how to better manage ADHD when you're having it, and especially when you're suffering from it,
Yeah.
which is amazing. A lot of people also started doing a lot of hypotheses about nutrition, saying, you know, if it's the hunter-gatherer phenotype, then it means that you have to have a hunter-gatherer food to go with it. And in which case, I'm not sure which one would it be, but they said a lot of meat and a lot of vegetables, basically, and less processed food. So I guess, what do you think about that, actually?
Well, again, that's not only goes for people with ADHD. I mean, it's been having a more healthy type of nutrition. It's also desirable in general. Yes, as I said before, I mean, the fact that it's not a phenotype, it's not an island, and it's connected to everything. It means that changing the environment, it's not only changing one factor of the environment, but it's globally changing the environment. So yeah, I think this is also a really cool approach that people can have. Yeah.
That's really, really, really cool. I mean, it's really nice to be able to have more insights into that. So moving forward, would you like, would you like to do studies about ADHD again on a genetic perspective, or to go more deep into that? Because I know that you're doing now more analytical stuff, if
Yes.
I remember well. But would you
Yes.
like at some point to, you know, go back to studying ADHD, or you mentioned, I think, autism last time we spoke as well?
Yes.
Do you have any further projects that are going in that direction?
Yeah. So basically, so I'm totally in my group is totally analyzing those type of phenotypes, complex phenotypes in particular. So we are developing basically a methodology, because this is one of the bottlenecks that we have nowadays in evolutionary biology. The results and the questions that you are able to answer depends on two things, in my opinion. The first, it's on data availability. I mean, if you don't have data, you're screwed. That's the first thing. But this is something that it's quite general. I mean, you can go to internet, and there is plenty of those databases from ancient DNA, but also from current humans, for different phenotypes and so on and so forth. The second part is that you need to know how to analyze that. So this is in my opinion the big bottleneck that we have nowadays, and that's why we are moving more toward the development of methodology. But obviously, the development of methodology is because we want to apply to something. And
Of
one
course.
of the things is ADHD is one of the phenotypes that we are still analyzing with Bruckmann, but also autism. We are moving also in this direction. So we want to see also if there are signatures of selective pressures in this
Mm-hmm.
phenotype. There has been some articles suggesting yes, others saying not. But as I said before, it really depends on which methodology you apply that you will be able to see something or not.
Yeah. Yeah,
It also
absolutely. So,
depends on which are the studies that are coming out on the phenotype itself. So in the case of the ADHD, the first so the GWAS that we used, this study that was analyzing the association between ADHD and non-ADHD, that was the first one that was done in for this particular phenotype. But the stage was quite underpowered, and they recognized that in the study. I mean, it's not that they say no, this is perfect,
yeah, of
and the
course.
point is that I mean, the point is that the amount of markers that they found was quite limited.
Mm.
So this means that once they finished this study, they started doing a bigger one, and they are finding many other genetic markers that before were not considered. So it will be completely worth to redo all the analysis with all the new methodology that we have, not only the ones that we are developing, but also others that have been published, in order to see first if we can corroborate this hypothesis that we initially had, so that those results that we found, and second, to see if we can go deeper and say more things about the phenotype and the evolution of the phenotype.
That would be absolutely amazing. And just as a general question, because you're going to have maybe a lot of people listening to this, but are you looking, maybe for participants to come in and get tested, or no? Because maybe, are you looking, for more data of alive people?
Yes. So not in my case, because as I said, I am more in the methodological part, but
Mm-hmm.
I know that Bruckmann is involved in this type of projects, because this is the key point for this part is the data gathering, in particular for this type of association studies that are called whole genome association studies.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, I mean, they are quite expensive in terms of, because you end up having hundreds, thousands of people, and then you have for each of these of those persons, you have to do a test, a genetic test,
Yeah.
and just recover millions of markers. To say, just gathering this, it's complex, and it's logistically it's complex. So I know that Bruckmann is involved in those type of projects. So if people wants to join and to collaborate and to participate, I'm more than sure that he will be extremely pleased, because, as I say, this is the big bottleneck nowadays, is this having this type of data.
That would be absolutely excellent. I am going to ask you after we record, all the links and all of that, and I'm going to be posting it in the description of the Spotify episode and the YouTube one, and going to post it on all the other social media. So if people want to go and participate, they can just click the link there, which
Cool.
is easy this way. Right, and so the final question that I have for you is, what should people pay attention looking at research like the one that you've done, and in general terms after listening to this episode?
Yeah, that's another tricky question.
Yeah, what would be the general conclusion of all of this, basically?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that you have to be, whenever you read one of those articles, you have to be very cautious with the how you interpret the results, and because it's very easy to end up in storytelling and end up making a cartoon out of the phenotype, and this is a danger.
Yeah.
In particularly, as I said before, in evolution, it's very tempting to explain everything by evolution, but the drawback is that you need then to test what you have said, that it's an evolutionary hypothesis. You have to test it, because otherwise you can end up having, for the same particular phenomenon, you can have two completely different antagonistic evolutionary explanations, and both equally probable. And then it's you know that whenever something explains everything, then it explains nothing at all.
Yeah.
So so this is the first thing to be said. The second is that we are right now starting this. I mean, the all the GWAS, so all these studies that analyze complex phenotypes, they are, I mean, it's less than 20 years that they started being really in a very kind of fashionable way.
Yeah.
So this means that there is still a lot to be discovered. We know that the phenotypes are extremely complex, and the interaction that we are analyzing nowadays by those type of studies are very limited. So the modeling itself, statistical modeling, it's quite simple. That's because also we don't have enough power to do much more complex things. But my key message would be just stay on the track of the papers and the studies that are coming, and don't get anything for granted. So just don't get the first message you get it, because this can change completely in the next article, depending on, again, as I said before, if the study has increased, if the methodology have changed. So at the end of the day, this has to be a process that it gets reassured every time that you do a new analysis with a new methodology.
Yeah, so don't oversimplify, and keep learning, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, a hypothesis is just as good as when it reaches its limit.
Yes, exactly. Totally.
All right. Well, I mean, thank you very much. I think this was, everything that I had prepared for today, and I think there is plenty of material for people to listen to it, which is absolutely great. And I wanted really to thank you so much for this interview, for agreeing to be here, because this has been enlightening in more than one ways. Even though I read your paper and other papers, I've really learned a lot. I've had a lot of nuance, a lot of things. So really, thank you so much, and I hope that you get to continue this amazing research.
No, thank you very much for inviting me. It was really a great pleasure to be here.
And if you want people, I don't know if you would like people to contact you, or if you want people to look more into your papers and into your studies, where can they look up more of your work?
Well, I mean, I can give you my web page link to where I'm nowadays.
Yeah, to the institute.
As my institute, and because I don't have a personal web page or a Wikipedia type of.
All right, so
I'm not so famous.
They can go look up the institute page, and there they can see all of your work and everything that you're doing right now. Excellent. Really, thank you very much. And
you're more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for everyone listening, see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.